Hello my friends, hope you are well. In my last video I did a 24-hour painting marathon where I painted up the whole of Isengard in one go, and apparently I have the resilience of a frail old grasshopper because I ended up being really ill afterwards. But I am now back in action and I wanted to make something fun to get me back into my groove. So today I'll be showing you how I made this nifty little grot tank from scratch. Well, mostly from scratch. Mostly.
Swamp Rip.
If you've seen any of my previous Swamp Hero Guard build videos, you'll know I'm a massive fan of cheeky little green boys, and I've always wanted to get my hands on a grot tank or two because they just look really fun and goofy, but given the perpetual state of unavailability on Forge World and their quite hefty price tags, I thought I'd just try and make one myself. This will be just for fun, you know, I'm not planning to have this as an actual playable miniature, more so just a cool little display piece. I'll be using a whole bunch of salvaged odds and ends for this build, and I'm starting with this old toothpick box as the main core of our tank's hull. I used some balsa wood to add slopes on either end of the box, as balsa wood is really soft and easily shapeable, which helped me to quite easily get our kind of tank shape underway. I traced the whole shape onto some plasticard and cut out sections of it to act as armoured plating, covering up that wood grain and give me a nice crisp flat edge to work from. After trimming and neatening up the plasticard, however, I wasn't really a fan of the shape I'd built, so I decided to chop down the bottom edges at a roughly 45-degree angle, clean them up a bit, and then add some more plasticard armoured plating. This instantly looked way better and felt like much more of an intuitive kind of tank hull shape, so I was basically feeling like a qualified engineer at this point. Easy. I used some more plasticard pieces to build little edges on each side of the hull, allowing me to expand the top section where the turret would go and give a foundation for the armoured skirts to sit on later. And then I used a few corner pieces of plasticard rods to build up a bit of extra bracing on the front section, just starting to add some layers, you know. And at this point I was reasonably happy with the whole shape, so it was time to move on to the turret. I was feeling really excited about making the turret actually, and I wanted it to look quite oversized and goofy like the actual grot tanks do, so after sticking down a random lid here, I attached another larger one on top with a spacer made of some leftover resin sprue, which allowed them to overlap quite nicely and added to the layered look. I had this random sci-fi lump of junk from who knows where and added this to the rear of the turret for an extra bit of heft, because we all love a bit of extra heft in the rear. And then I used some more of that cornered plasticard rod stuff to add some little spiky armoured bits and merge it in with the turret a bit more. For the big old blaster itself, again I wanted a kind of chunky oversized look, with this section of a soap pumper being perfect for the job and also proving that I have in fact washed enough to use a full bottle of soap at least once in my life. I used this round section of a contact lens case to act as a kind of mantle for our blaster and secured everything in place with a few dollops of hot glue, and I thought this looked really cool actually. I especially love how the shorter barrel piece emerges from the textured section of the pump, so yeah, cool. I added a couple more layers of plasticard to the turret to line up with the mantle I just added, using this diamond textured piece on top for that extra pizzazz and wow factor.
Wow.
And then I cracked out this hatch, which I'd had for ages and had been saving for the perfect project, with that being today, baby. It looked really cool when it was glued down, and it does actually open and close, which is very crazy. Also, because I was all excited and pumped up from the hatch being so cool, I did a bit more impromptu body detailing, adding some little rods on these side pieces and adding some old exhaust and a gas canister to the back here. Of course, having an exposed gas canister on a tank doesn't make much sense, but this is a grot tank, and these little green boys are not the sharpest pine cones in the tree, so we can all just move past it, okay? I did come back later and add some more cornered armor pieces to the turret, but that's the main construction of it done, and it was surprisingly easy actually. But now it was the time I was not very excited for, time to build the track sections. So yeah, I feel like all projects have that one part you dread, and for this little fella it was definitely this section. I'd been planning to build the tracks completely from scratch too, but all the prototypes I'd experimented with off screen looked like hot garbage. So luckily my dad took pity on my plight and donated this tiger tank set to the cause. I chopped down these side pieces with the wheel mount so they'd fit the length of our Grot tank and glued them down with some plastic art to help them line up with the bracing pieces. I then lovingly added some wheels to each of the little wheel appendages, but I wanted the tracks to come up a bit higher than the profile of these mounts would allow, so I used a bit more plastic art to attach the drive wheels up on the front here and a bit of extra sprue to attach the rear wheels up here. And then began the time-consuming process of turning these individual segments of track into a fully connected set, which was a bloody nightmare to be honest. So, adding the larger pieces to the top and the bottoms of the wheels was fine obviously, but when it came to actually joining them up, it was a different story, amigo. I had to use a bunch of smaller sections and glue them together in a way that they'd fit around the curve of the wheels to connect the large sections. And at one point, I had to literally glue together individual track links, which at this scale was a ball ache. Look at the state of my fingers here with all the super glue on them, and then look at these tiny little links and you'll begin to understand the torment I was going through at this point. But yeah, I soldiered on as I always do, got the tracks all connected, and then went about doing a whole bunch of nipping, clipping and snipping to make sure everything lined up and there were no visible gaps between the links. And actually, to be fair, they look pretty good in the end, so all the rage felt like it was worth it at least. And FYI, you're seeing like 30 seconds of this process, but this literally took me like 4 hours somehow, so good times I suppose. Anyway, with our tracks added, I can now get to work on the finishing touches for our little Grotmobile. So first up, I added some armoured side skirts above the tracks using some plastic card with a corner piece and some thin rod underneath, which allowed me to slope them downward and increase crew protection by 17%. Also, I threw on a few random tubey bits under here for some extra detail, a bit more thin rod along the edges of the side skirts to hide the joint, and a bunch of squared plastic card pieces for some makeshift ERA or just somewhere to paint on the classic green boy checkers later. The front area of the hull was now feeling a bit empty by comparison, so I used some more corner pieces of the plastic card to clutter it up a bit more, and then I thought, you know what, this turret looks a bit nudie too. Why don't I glue a bunch of them up here as well? And that is what I did. These corner pieces were the real MVP of this build for me. I think the angular look of them really adds to the makeshift or less sophisticated armoured appearance of the tank, which is very fitting for the Grots, so shout out to my corner pieces all over the globe. I added a couple of little greebly connection point things at the back here, then used some guitar strings to connect the gas cylinder to the main body of the tank, which looked pretty sweet. And then I just went around adding a whole bunch of these little rivets wherever it looked a bit too clean, and these were also really good for making our tank look a bit more grotty and thrown together, and they were also really easy to make. They're basically just little clippings of the thin plastic card rods, so yeah, easy peasy. Finally, I just went around and filled in any visible gaps using some green stuff, and all of a sudden our tank was finished. So now we just need some crew for it. I wanted the commander up top hanging from the hatch and a driver down below poking his little green head through, so I made a start by drilling a hole in the hatch here. This swiftly detached the whole upper turret unit, which was actually a good thing in the end because after widening and smoothing out the hole, I reattached it slightly off to one side, which made it look a lot more kind of dynamic. And this friendly little guy got a few little snips here and there, say goodbye to your limbs, and I stuck him into place using a generous dollop of hot glue. For the driver, I got a little hole going down here using a hobby knife, widened it out using a file, and then glued the head in place, kind of half protruding and half hidden, like myself when I've eaten too much fiber. For a very final touch to the tank, I decided to add some little smoke plumes coming out of the exhaust, so I drilled those out and whipped up some little candy floss looking smoke plumes from wire, tin foil, cotton wool and super glue. I started making these recently for my Swamp Hero Guard builds, and now I feel like I need to incorporate some anytime I'm building machinery for my green boys, as it just adds a bit more of a dynamic effect to them. And before I start painting, I just wanted to attach this bad boy to a little display base, so I've just chopped some foam up to fit this random oval base, glued that down, and then covered it with my homemade mud mixture. Once it's dried properly, I secure the tank down using some hot glue, and then used a bit more of the mud mixture to hide that glue and start adding some texture to the wheels and tracks. And I have to say, I was really liking how this was looking, and it was finally time for me to start slinging some paint around. Now, I was expecting the painting for this to be quite a long-winded process for some reason, but if anything, it was the exact opposite of that. I wanted a nice orky yellow colour for the armoured panels, so I painted over the black primer with a lighter grey colour first, to make building up a layer of yellow a bit easier. Uriel yellow was my colour of choice for this, and I won't lie, even with that lighter base coat I did, it still took me like 38 layers of this to get a coat down that looks semi-okay, but I didn't cry about it too much, because all yellows suck.
Seriously, I've had it up to here with yellow shit.
And it won't be visible once I grind this baby up anyway. I painted in the metallic sections next using some Iron Warriors metallic, which is a really dark metallic colour actually, and once that was finished I just went around painting in a couple of details with a gas canister at the back getting a nice coat of red and the squared pieces of armour on the side skirts getting the classic checkered pattern. Nothing fancy, just some little bits to contrast with the yellow. Next, I covered the entire tank with streaking grime, and as you'll see in the corner down here, I did manage to spill pretty much the entire pot as I was doing this, so that was cool, but I managed to salvage some of it at least, and before the tank dried off completely, I used some white spirits to start cleaning it up and revealing some of the yellow below. And this stuff is why I wasn't massively concerned about the yellow coat being perfect, as now with all the grime added, you would be none the wiser. I added a few quick little highlights on the yellow areas with some flash gets yellow, not being super precise, just adding some brightness on some edges, and then highlighted the barrel at the back using a brighter red colour and completely blanking on the name of. I thought the metal could do with looking even more battered up and corroded, so I slung some dirty down rust onto these sections to build up more of a rusty patina, wiped off some of the excess, and then just used a little lead belcher to add some variety to it. After that, there wasn't much surface area of Grot to paint, you know, these are tiny little guys and it's just their heads poking out, but I first gave them an overbrushing with some very pale grey to make the corandrous green contrast paint I had next pop a bit more. Doing this over the black would have looked not good, no bueno, so it's always good to have a brighter undercoat for your contrast paints. Then I'm just doing my usual kind of grotty Gretchen paint scheme for these that I've shown a bunch of times in my Swamp Hero Guard videos, so nothing fancy, just start with the corandrous green for the skin, a few assorted colours for any details and pieces of clothing, and then build up a nice bright highlight on the skin using some moot green and some moon dust in successive layers. So yeah, check out some of my previous videos if you want to see my Gretchen paint scheme in more detail, but you probably get the gist. I finished the last details like the teeth and this hefty cleaver, and we are looking pretty good. The smoke plumes get a super basic paint job, just dry brushing on a faint amount of grey and then some white, leaving a lot of that black base coat in place to maintain the dirty oily look of the smoke. I then add a bit more mud mixture around the wheels and track. I was planning to just paint it onto the muddy texture I added earlier, but I felt like it could use a bit more mud. And once that dried, it was just a bit of dry brushing and some splodges of paint to bring out the texture in the mud, and a nice little rim job of black to finish this puppy off. Let's see how she's looking. So, my friends, what do you think? I really like this little creation actually. I think it's probably ended up being slightly larger than the actual Grot tanks are, which is okay because I'm not planning to use it for gameplay anyway, but overall I'm really happy with the look we've accomplished today. I think painting yellow always kind of sucks, and I pretty much only do it when I know I'm going to cover it up with grime and dirt anyways, as it's so hard to get good coverage with it. But sometimes I do feel a bit like I'm cheating when I use stuff like, streaking grime or dirty down rust to cover everything up. Like I said earlier, I thought the painting would end up being quite a long process, and it could have been really if I'd spent ages painting in all that dirt and grime myself, being quite deliberate about where it's being placed. But I think that when you can get results that look this good for a fraction of the time and investment, then why bother putting in all that time? I don't know, maybe I forced myself to paint up a dirty old vehicle without relying on these magic potions so much and see how much of an effort it really is in comparison. I think the stars of this build for me today are the corner pieces of plasticard, which looks super cool as makeshift orky armor, the rivets, which were super easy to create and make everything look a bit closer to the unrefined building techniques we would expect of our little green boys, and finally I can't forget our green boys themselves. The nice little bright green pops over the darkened down and grimy yellow are magnifique. What is it? Magnifique. Lovely. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment and let me know down below what your favorite part of the build is, or what you would do differently, or what your favorite type of alien is. Mine is probably the traditional grey, you know, that's the classic, isn't it? But as always, I have been your friendly neighborhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya.